suggest, or do you want to?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Okay. So, Sheldon, I was thinking maybe we could pick up with Virginia, and then we can go on to Europe, and
Yeah.
then maybe Ariel.
Okay.
All those three big subjects.
Very big.
Plenty to say on that.
Yeah. I made a little. I made a bit of a mistake in the chronology
Yeah. Well,
last time.
you can correct anything you want. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't start teaching at the new school until after we came back from Europe.
Okay.
When I was in graduate school, where these big famous professors at the time were at Columbia, but nobody knows them anymore, would call Mark Van Doren and Lionel Trilling, and in history of art, Meyer Shapiro, and cultural history, Jacques Barzun, who just died in October at almost 105. And in philosophy, there was Ernest Nagel at the philosophy department, who was an expert in logic and scientific method, and was originally from Czechoslovakia. But he was very famous at the time. Anyway, I studied with him, and he was into the analytic philosophy, which was the big thing at the time, logical analysis of language and so on, like influenced by Wittgenstein. Anyway, that direction didn't interest me because I was more interested in the humanistic side, represented by the Trilling and Barzun and Meyer Shapiro. So as I said, I found out about the European-oriented theologians at Union Theological Seminary, and I went over and studied with them. And at that time, they were just hearing about existentialism, and Sartre was becoming the big thing in Europe. So I went over there, and they introduced me to Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and I became interested in that side of philosophy. So, as I said, they told me that if that was what I was interested in, I had to go to Europe. But meanwhile, I had found a beautiful apartment on Riverside Drive in 136th Street, right north of the Riverside Church, and right over a bridge in Harlem that went to Columbia at one end. And it was a beautiful 8-room apartment facing the river. And Virginia and I moved into it from where she had joined me on East 76th Street, which also wasn't a bad apartment, but it was small, like this. Anyway, so it was a beautiful apartment, and it was empty, and I was used to fixing things up. So I acquired quite a bit of stuff, mostly bookcases and mostly books. But I guess I went to the Salvation Army and picked up some nice furniture. And I was fixing it up pretty nicely. 8 rooms. Virginia and I kept the front living room and dining room, bathroom and kitchen, and we rented out the 5 rooms in the back to students. So we had we got some very nice students. One of them was a cartoonist for the New Yorker. Another one was the girlfriend of Paul Tillich's son. And anyway, they were nice kids, and we only charged them $10 a week for the apartments. So anyway, cheap. And I fixed up each room, and it was pretty nice. There were 3 bathrooms in the apartment, 2 in the back, and 1 we kept for ourselves in the front. And the kitchen was large, so it was very amenable to us. And we were both going to classes at Columbia Graduate School. And it was also not far from International House, Columbia International House. So I used to stop there and talk to people, international students. So it was a pretty nice setup. But they kept telling me at Union Theological I had to go to Europe. And I had a friend who did go to Europe. Van Leeuwen, his name was. You know, intelligent young fellow. And he came back, and he brought back a girl from Sweden. Sweden or Denmark. I don't remember which. Copenhagen, or maybe Copenhagen. Anyway, very nice girl. Spoke English. Very well educated. Very intelligent. And the 2 of them were just raving about the Scandinavian countries and European culture and society, and they also said we had to go. So I said, well, how are we going to go? I mean, we don't have a grant or anything. Most people who go get grants and go, or some kind of scholarships. So he said, well, you're renting out these 5 rooms here. You're making about $200 a month from renting out the rooms. So get somebody to do it for you and send you the money. So I did. I got a graduate student I knew who was a very left-oriented guy. So he was like, you know, I thought full of socialistic ideals. His name was Jerry Lucas. He was in the graduate department of Columbia. So he agreed to take over the apartment, pay the rent, collect the rent from the subtenants, and send us $100 a month. So I thought, well, that's pretty good. And this fellow then who said on $100 a month at the rate of exchange in Europe, we could survive. Which the rate of exchange was very good for dollars at that time.
Okay, sorry. All right, we're rolling. Yeah.
So anyway, Virginia responded to the idea. She liked the idea also. And, you know, she thought we were only gone for a short time. So we were taking time out from our graduate work. And she thought that there was a lot for her to get out of it. So we went on a boat. In those days, not many people flew. We took a boat. Forget the name of the boat, but it'll come back to me. Anyway, it was a nice little boat. It was, I think it was a Greek boat. It wasn't American. It was a nice little boat. It had a nice dining room, and there were nice young people working on it. And we had a nice trip. I think it took about 7, 8 days to get there. It was a little rocky at one time, but that's all. And we arrived in Le Havre, which is north of France. I think it stopped in Britain briefly, but I'm not sure. But we didn't get off anyway. We got off in Le Havre. You know, without, I don't know, a little suitcases, not much stuff we didn't take. And we had no idea how we were going to get any further or where we were going. But we both knew a little French, so we managed. And then I guess we took the train. Well, we took the train to Paris. Gare du Nord. Came in the northern station. And from there, we just walked through Montmartre down to the Champs-Élysées, which was central, and down to the student quarter. It was called Quartier Latin, Latin Quarter, for some reason. I guess originally the students studied Latin. And that was the hub of all the intellectual activity at the time, anyway.
What year was this?
Pardon?
What year was this?
This was 1952. 1952. So it was only 7 years after the end of the war. So they were still, you know, recovering from the war. And we went, and right away we found a little room in a maid's quarter. They had these apartment houses that had maids' quarters on the top floor, 5th floor up. They had little rooms that they had for the maids in the old days. So we went there and walked up, and I mean, I don't know how we found it, but someone must have told us. I don't remember what street it was, but it was right near the Seine, right near the river, and right near the museum, the Louvre. So it was right in the center of things.
Nice location.
Yeah, it was a very good location. And it was nice. Had a very nice view because it was up on the 5th floor. So it had a nice, wide open view. But it was a tiny room. Anyway, that's where we went. and it was 350 francs a month, which was $1. That was you would get 350 francs for $1.
You had plenty of money for a cappuccino and
Right, plenty of money.
croissant.
That's right. So you know, we were thrilled. I mean, it was like tremendous, terrific. But it was a very tiny room, and it was up 5 flights.
Bathroom in the
So we-
hallway type
pardon?
thing? Bathroom in the hallway, tub in the kitchen type thing?
Yes, I don't remember where the bathroom and the kitchen were. I don't think there was a kitchen. I don't think there was a kitchen. I guess there was a bathroom somewhere. But we went right down to the cafe for the sandwiches and stuff. We ate in the cafes because that was also very cheap. You could get a meal for like 50 cents. So, and it was good, you know, too. French cooking. Breakfasts were very good, you know, good French pastries and good fresh French bread. It was very, very good stuff. Anyway, but walking up and down the steps was a little bit bothersome, and it was very small. So we looked elsewhere, and I don't know how it happened, but we met this couple, American couple, who'd been there for a while, and they had an apartment. And they were going to go to Burma, now called Myanmar. They wanted to go to Burma. I don't know why. I guess it was a progressive Eastern country at the time. So you had to have key money to get the apartment. And they asked us for $200 for the apartment. Which, of course, nowadays is ridiculously cheap sum. So $200 was nothing to me at that time. So I gave them the $200, and they gave us the key to the apartment, and it was ours. There was no lease or anything. We just paid the janitor. In those days, they called the janitors concierge. The janitor lived on the first floor. So we just paid the janitor. And it had no bathroom, but it was actually an adjunct building to a little hotel in the front. Hotel was like a little rooming house, really. In those, they called them hotels. I forget the name of the hotel. Virginia would remember it. It'll come back to me. Anyway, it was on Rue de l'Ambre, Delambre. That's street of amber, Delambre. I don't know what was amber, but anyway, it was a famous street, and it was right off Boulevard Montparnasse, which was the center of everything. And there were famous cafes right there, right down the street from this building. Anyway, it was Hotel des Bains, it was called. Hotel of the Baths, because they had public baths at the time. And behind this little rooming house was a building that had baths for people, and you paid $1 or 50 cents, and you were able to take a bath. And the toilet, but the way we got to the apartment was on a a parapet that extended out beyond the little building, the hotel. So we had to walk up about 3 flights and then across the parapet to the building behind. Yeah, adjunct building it was. And then behind that one was the baths. Anyway, on this parapet there was a toilet. But it was not American type toilet. It was Turkish toilet, they called them, which was just a hole in the ground with a pull cord for cleaning it out. But it was a toilet. And inside there was a tiny kitchenette. I don't remember if there was gas or electricity or whatever, but it was just a tiny kitchenette, just like in the city here.
Just 1 second. Hold on. Okay.
And it had a little tiny living room and a little tiny bedroom. Very tiny, but it was 2 rooms. And it had a nice open view because it was in this yard overlooking the bath building and the courtyard, and it was and overlooking the roofs, the Paris roofs. So it was pleasant, and it was clean and neat, and this couple had fixed it up, and I think they left a bed. As I remember, yeah, I think they left a bed. So we moved in there, and we were very comfortable. Oh, and also, twice a week there used to be a street market right outside where the farmers and vendors would come and bring all the foodstuffs. It was right outside. So we could just walk down early in the morning and get our pick of all the fresh food. And also it was very cheap. I mean, it was ridiculously cheap with American money. So we were pretty comfortable and happy there. And then we started meeting Americans because the Americans were all over the place. And especially Boulevard Montparnasse, in the cafes. The Americans were there all the time. Well, we met one guy, I forget his name, but the name will come back to me, who had been there about 3-4 years already. And he was living with a French girl. And he had come to study French, and he was already extremely proficient in French. So he and this girl were talking French all the time, and they introduced us to the French side of things, so to speak. But mostly we hung out with the Americans. And Scandinavians. I met a lot of Scandinavians. And then the famous sculptor Giacometti was living near there. He has stuff in the Modern Museum here now. Very famous sculptor. And he used to walk past all the time, and he was a very striking looking man. Very lean and bony and tallish. Anyway, he walked past all the time. It was nice to look at him. And of course, oh yeah, and we just spent a lot of time going to the museums, of course. That's right away what we did. We went to the museums all the time. And the market, there was a big marketplace called Leal, L-E-S, Halles. It means the stalls. And it was a very big, famous marketplace. on the other side of the town. So we used to go over there and go see it near the Eiffel Tower. And of course we went to the Eiffel Tower and all that stuff. So, you know, we were having a very good time. But after a while, the money stopped coming. This fellow stopped sending the money. And I couldn't figure out what was happening. So I wrote to him, I think, or I got in touch with him somehow. Or I sent this other friend of mine down to check, or my brother to check. And what happened was that he had talked to the landlord, and he had told the landlord about it, and he had arranged with the landlord to take over the lease himself and to cut us out of it.
Oh, no.
Right. This idealistic socialist. So he cut us out of it and don't send any money anymore. But a lot of the people, guys I knew, were teaching French at the Berlitz School. And James Joyce had taught at the Berlitz School. That's how he survived. So I went down to the Berlitz School and I started teaching French.
English, presumably.
I mean English to the French people. And actually I got some, you know, they were middle-class French people, not just students. They were middle-class, professional French people. So that was kind of interesting. It was nice. It was easy. And of course, they learned fast. But the amount of money they paid was in French francs, so it was very trivial compared to what we had. But it was enough to survive on.
How long had you been there at that point?
I don't know, a few months. Maybe a year. I mean, the time went fast. You know, and we were having a wonderful time. I mean, because it's a beautiful city. It's just a beautiful city. Everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm.
And we were getting along fine. I mean, Virginia and I were getting along fine. But running out of money got to be a little difficult. And the amount of money I was able to earn at the Berlin School was not sufficient. So I was walking down the Boulevard Montparnasse one day. I used to walk there all the time, and some guy from over in the cafe, I forget which cafe it was, but a famous cafe. They were all famous cafes there. Came over to me and he said, "There's a guy over here who wants to talk to you." I said, "He wants to talk to me?" "Why?" "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, he wants to talk to you. He's talking to a lot of American guys over here." I said, "What do you mean, he?" He said, "Is he an American?" He said, "Oh, well, he's an American, but he's coming over here starting a company. And he's hiring people, and he might hire you." "Oh, really?" So, yeah, so I went over and met him. And he was a young American, but an unusual American. He was originally born in Constantinople, Jewish, but he had been in American. They brought him over. He lived in Brooklyn, and he was a social worker. He had studied social work, and he went to the Merchant Marines, and he was in the Merchant Marines during the war. And he got extremely Americanized, of course, in the Merchant Marines. And he had been in, he came back from the Merchant Marines, and he needed money, so he got to, and at that time, the stock market was booming. And they were selling mutual funds. So he was starting a mutual fund sales company in Europe. Actually, he had started it in New York. But I forgot to mention, meanwhile, there were guys selling Encyclopedia Britannicas to the American soldiers on the bases. Encyclopedias. And I got solicited into that to sell encyclopedias. Of course, I was an educated person. I could sell an encyclopedia. So I had been selling encyclopedias. And all the guys who were selling encyclopedias were getting in with this guy to sell mutual funds, which paid quite a bit more money. The commissions were very high. And it was interesting because that was a very American thing to be doing. I mean, you would go to the army bases and hang out with the soldiers, and and it was like a little bit of home. And the soldiers were living pretty high on the bases, because they had their own supply stores, PXs they were called. So they were living very comfortably, and they were making quite a bit of money compared to the French money.
Okay, sorry.
It's a long story.
Yeah. All right. Hope you go.
So anyway, this guy, I went over and sat down and talked to him. Of course, he was Jewish, and he was from New York, and it was extremely easy to talk to him. And he had been a social worker. So he had a human interest in human relationships, and he was very skilled at talking to people. He was a people person, very skilled at it. And, nice. I mean, it was interested in people. So everybody who worked for him was happy working for him. So he said to me I should come and work for him. So I said, well, this is not really my kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not really into this. I'm not enjoying selling even the encyclopedias. I enjoy teaching at the Berlitz School more. So he said, look, he said, with your background, you're going to do very well. I'm going to make you into a training director. Well, I said, what do you mean a training director? He said, well, I'm hiring all these people who really don't know anything about selling. They don't know anything about other people. They have very limited social skills. And you could be sort of a tutor to them. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, okay. And he said, anyway, I'll give you commissions on whatever they sell. I'll give you an override. So you don't have to do only selling. You could do this training also. I said, well, gee, that sounds pretty good. He said, well, what do you know about selling? I say, I don't know anything about it, really. He says, it's all about the way you manipulate people. I say, manipulate people? I'm not into manipulating people. That's your... He said, well, it's not really as terrible as you think. You got to read this book by Andrew Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's what selling is based on. You know, it's based upon the way that you relate to people. The word manipulate is not exactly right, he said. But it was right. Anyway, he was a very attractive guy, and the offer was very attractive. So I told Virginia I was going to do it, and then I took it. And the next thing I knew, he said, "Well, all the bases, all the places we have in France are occupied already. All the guys are doing this already. I've got, a team in there." He said, "So, you know German, so you got to go to Germany and work in Germany." Oh, I had already made trips to Germany. I forgot about that, because originally that's what I went there to contact German culture. So I had already made a trip to the University of Freiburg, and I had sat in on Heidegger's lectures in Freiburg. And I stayed there for a few months. Virginia stayed in Paris. Anyway, I knew German, and so he said, go to Germany and set up a situation there. So I said, well, we got this apartment here, and I like it. He said, I'll give you the money for the apartment, and I put one of my guys in there, and you could give up the apartment, and Virginia could come to the office and work in the office. I'm going to be moving the office to Switzerland anyway. So that's what happened. I went to Germany, and Virginia went to the office in Switzerland, Geneva.
Can I ask a question? Were you worried at all about the relationship? Because you went off to Germany, you went to Geneva.
No, I wasn't. I don't remember worrying about it, but I guess there were probably frictions. I mean, we didn't get along. I mean, it wasn't as good a relationship as I know relationships could be. I mean, we weren't that much into each other. We were more into France and culture and that stuff. I mean, literature, all those things. We just sort of lived side by side. But we got along. And I used to do the shopping and a lot of the cooking because she wasn't into that very much. Virginia was never much into household stuff. And we just we didn't fix up the place any. We just dragged up some secondhand furniture, and it was very easy to get. But we got along, and she seemed to be having a good time. But she was not very taken with this guy and his business, even though she went to work in the office. She didn't like...
What kind of business was it again?
Selling mutual funds.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Brokers, he's a broker. Mm-hmm. He had an arrangement with a famous fund in the United States. But basically, it was a lot of manipulation. You know, it was American-style business. A lot of manipulation of people. Manipulating the people you sold to and manipulating the salespersons. And manipulating the governments that you were dealing with. Actually, the French drove him out. That's one of the reasons he went to Switzerland. Because they had questions about his propriety. Anyway, there were legal issues in Switzerland too. But they got to him later, but right then he succeeded, opened up a very fancy office in Geneva. I forget the name of the street, but it was a very well-known street. And it was appealing because it was very prosperous. So Virginia went there and she rented a place. She stayed there and I went to Germany. I mean, we weren't separating or anything. It was just practical. But she didn't like those people. She didn't like the type of orientation that they had, which was typical ideology of manipulating people. Typical American stuff, which I didn't like very much either. But I made more money than I had ever made before. So I liked it, making the money. And some of the guys made fantastic amounts of money. And this guy who was running it was becoming a millionaire. He was becoming fabulously wealthy.
Were they doing business in English or in German?
In all languages.
So did Virginia speak German as well?
No, she spoke French.
Okay.
She went to Switzerland, Geneva, Switzerland.
Right, okay.
But she knew French.
Okay.
So, I forgot. For a while there, I had been gone to England. And I had taken Virginia with me. So we lived in Cambridge. And I was doing business on a army base right outside of Cambridge. And we found a nice apartment not far from the Cambridge campus with a professor, a retired, well, I don't know if he was tired, but he was pretty old, professor of imperial history at Cambridge.
Do you remember what year this was?
I don't know, 53, maybe 54.
So you're in 2 years already.
Yeah,
in Europe by that point.
we had been there a while. Anyway, we found this nice place, nice building in Cambridge for a professor. But they were all elderly. And England hadn't quite recovered from the war. There was still a lot of ruins. And economically, they haven't pulled out of it. So this professor and his wife didn't have much money. So they were extremely frugal. I mean, more frugal than any American ever is. I mean, they didn't have any heat, and they didn't have any hot water. And they, were penurious. So that was not too pleasant.
No hot water.
Pardon?
No hot water.
No hot water.
Not even for bathing?
Oh yeah, they used to
Oh.
heat up. They used to heat up kettles of water
Okay.
on the stove and put it in the bathtub, and then they would take a bath and they would use the water to wash their clothing.
Oh.
So that every once in a while there would be a bathtub full of clothes that they would just leave soaking in there. So anyway, that's how they were living. And also, he was a professor of imperial history. So ideologically, it was not too agreeable to us. Because he was pro-empire. But anyway, we lived there, and I got a car, and I was driving the car to the bases. I don't know how I got the car, but I got it somehow. Maybe I got it in Germany and brought it back over. I think that's what happened. Anyway,
Do you remember what kind of car it was?
I think it was a carbon gear, Volkswagen. I'm pretty sure I got it in Germany. Yeah, I got it in Germany and drove it over. Anyway, one night I was driving back in the middle of the winter from the base, and I skidded on the ice and turned the car over. On my way back to Cambridge. So one of the guys from the base came along who happened to know me, and he came and saw what happened, and he took me back to the house. He got me out of there. But I had this feeling that I was dead. When I got out of the car, I got thrown clear. And, you know, and actually I wasn't damaged at all. And I got up and I thought I was dead. I had this feeling that I was dead. A strange feeling. But I wasn't dead. It was just a trauma. I wasn't even damaged. But the car was pretty damaged. And this guy came along who I knew from the base. I had been in his house, and I think I had tried to sell him the funds, and I think I did even. Shanley or Shane or something like that his name was. That'll come back to me. Anyway, so he picked me up and took me back to the apartment in Cambridge where Virginia was waiting for me. Of course, we got there very, very late, and she was sort of freaked out and worried and heard about it and was very upset. But, you know, she took care of me and I recuperated. And then I got this guy and we went and got the car, and he hauled the car back to the base, and the guys I knew there fixed up the car for me. Amazing. You know, I mean, they were the kind of guys who fixed cars with nothing to them. And I went and resumed with, you know, somewhat damaged car, but it was running. But that sort of turned Virginia off a little bit. So she went back to Paris.
So you didn't need any visas, I guess, at all during this time?
No, just American passport. Mm-hmm. Anyway, she went back to Paris, and this was a time when I went back to Paris occasionally, and this is where I met this guy. And then he said, I don't know exactly where. No, I was working already for this guy, but I went back to Paris after this English episode, and he told me to go to Germany. So that's when I went to Germany, and things were getting strained between Virginia and me, because we weren't together anymore. I was out doing the business all the time, and I wasn't that good at it, really. I mean, it wasn't my thing. I mean, that's part of what everything is all about. Manipulating people was not my thing. In fact, I was opposed to it also. It was very meretricious. And even when I was a young boy, I had an objection to crass materialism, commercialism, and psychological cunning that people had in order to manipulate other people. You know, convincing people of things, and it was very, what should I mean, it was part of the American style of life that I have already been turned off to when my father was working on the streets. And even he had very little of the kind of cunning and shrewd, conniving qualities, you know, that the others did who were selling diamonds. Because he had originally studied diamond cutting, which is a skill, a manual skill, which he was very good at. But selling things on the street was not his thing. I mean, and even he considered it a little meretricious, and I considered it very meretricious. I didn't like that mode of living. And I didn't like the people he introduced me to, the people he knew, which more about later, but anyway. Because basically it was a rip-off. It was a way of ripping people off, selling things, buying them cheap and selling them expensive. American-style cunning.
Yeah.
Quick pause. Hold on. Okay.
So, you know, I was, in the Jewish tradition, I was interested in education. And by the time I was in Europe, I had already worked my way beyond that mode of living or thinking. And of course, Virginia also, but she found it even more distasteful than I did. So she didn't get along with this guy or the people in his company. But, you know, she made friends in Geneva, Switzerland. And then I was making quite a bit of money. So money was not a problem to us. And she went traveling around. She went to different places to visit Europe. So, and she had friends in Switzerland, international people. So but we were becoming alienated from each other.
How are you staying in contact?
I don't know how we stayed in contact. By mail, I guess. Phones were limited, primitive at the time, by mail. But I had this card. I think I went back and forth a few times. Anyway,
What did you do in Cambridge?
what did I do in Cambridge?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
You know, you mean as far as the university is concerned? Well, I went to a few I went to a few dining rooms and met a few people. I went to a few lectures, but I didn't make much contact with the university. I heard E.M. Forster speak. That was about the most prestigious person I saw. But I was not interested in what I thought English, the English direction of thought was. I was already interested in French and German.
I'm curious what it was like to be in Germany, being of Jewish heritage.
Oh, that was kind of interesting because, first of all, Germany was already prospering. They were already working their way out. There was ruins everywhere, but they were remarkable industrial people. They were working their way out, and they had some pretty fancy places already set up. So I used to stay in hotels, but it was still cheap exchange, and the hotels were very comfortable. For a while I lived in London too. I forgot to mention that. Anyway, the accommodations were very much better than in England or France. So I had an apartment in Frankfurt that I rented from a German doctor, a young doctor, who had to go someplace else. I don't know why, probably for his practice. And it was a pretty nice apartment, a doctor's apartment, full of nice furniture and big, well-maintained, full of books, you know, overlooking the river. It was pretty nice. So I got to know a lot of young German people, particularly girls. So, I mean, I was, out there, young man alone, and there were a lot of, the girls were all responding to American guys. I mean, to them, we were heroes. And I had this fancy clothing. To them, I was, a big shot. Of course, very materialistic values they had also. But anyway, what was the question?
How did it feel to be Jewish in Germany?
Oh, yeah. But then I would get friendly with the girls, and I would want to meet their parents. I would want to go to their homes. Most of them were still living home. And I got very close to one of them. I don't remember exactly which one. But I wanted to meet her parents. She said, no. She can't take me to her home. I said, why not? She said, because you're Jewish. I said, because I'm Jewish. I say, I'm not Jewish, I'm an American. She said, no. To them, you're Jewish. My father was in the Gestapo. And when the war was over and the Americans came and started arresting the officers, he was an officer. He took off his uniform and he put on the enlisted man's uniform, and he fooled them. And so, anyway, eventually he got away, came back here. He's got a house, and my mother and me, and he doesn't like Jews. I said, what do you mean he doesn't like Jews? She said, it's more than he doesn't like them. He has a very strong prejudice. He doesn't want to know. He even wouldn't let you into his house. So, I mean, that distressed me a little bit. But, you know, then I heard that same thing from others. But I got pretty close to some of them anyway, because they liked Americans. To them, to these kids, I was an American, not a Jew. I mean, they didn't have this anti-Semitism anymore. And it was gone from Germany. I mean, it was like they wiped it out completely. It was amazing. It was amazing how they were recuperating from the war. They were efficient. They're remarkably efficient people, you know. And they had restaurants and stores, very well run. So it was very comfortable to be there. And I made quite a bit of money. So I stayed there for a while. But then there was this problem with Virginia. I don't know exactly what. She got to be very unhappy. Oh, and then her father died. So she came back to America for his death or his funerals, whatever. And then she wrote me that she didn't want to come back. She didn't want to come back to Europe. She didn't want to come back. This was before I gave up the apartment. I still had the apartment. But she said, she's not coming back, and I may as well give up the apartment. Because I was still working in Germany. Oh, no, but before that, I had also gone to Italy for a while, and I had worked in Italy for a while. And in Italy, I got hepatitis. Oh. You know, I was eating in restaurants, and it's easy. I mean, they're not too sanitary. So there was an hepatitis epidemic, and I got very sick. And I went to the Italian hospital, and it was pretty awful. If you saw Italian pictures of Italian hospitals, were not very pleasant.
Were you in Rome or?
No, I was in a place called Vicenza, which is an ancient town near Venice. It's famous for its architecture. Palladio, the architect, was there. Very famous architect.
Okay. Yep.
Anyway, it was a beautiful place, and I was there for a while, only a short while, but I enjoyed it because it was a very beautiful place. And this architect had an influence on the whole town. Anyway, and I was learning Italian, and I met some Italian people. You know, so I was kind of enthused with that. But anyway, I got very sick. I got so sick that they were worried about me in the hospital. And I was around all these Italian guys who were also very, very sick. And it wasn't very good care, to say the least. So I got in touch with Virginia somehow. I don't know how. Anyway, so she came down and took me back to Switzerland. She came down. Yeah, took me back, and I think it was in my car.
Sheldon, sorry, that's making. I'm going to pick up a lot of noise there.
Oh,
yeah.
Anyway, she came down. I think she picked me up with my car and drove me back to Switzerland, as I remember. It was a nice drive through the mountains. So that was a brief interlude.
Very good care in Switzerland.
Pardon?
They have very good care in Switzerland, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, then she took me to a hospital in Switzerland, which was like unbelievably good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in the modern hospital, extremely skilled doctors. They spoke English. They were very skilled. I recognized right away how skilled they were. So they took care of me, and I got better fast. And I guess I stayed in Virginia's apartment with her for a while. But then I had to go back. Yeah, so I don't know exactly. I think I went back to Germany because I wasn't going back to Italy.
I've got a question, Sheldon. I mean, it sounds like, I think from what you've said, Regina said, you had an understanding that you could have relationships with other people. Did you, or did you not talk about it?
It was not an understanding, but that was what was happening. But I mean, we had no understanding about it. It just happened. She also had boyfriends in Switzerland, which I only found out later. You know. But you see, the culture at the time that was commonplace. This was now. It was the 50s, and the sexual revolution was already happening. Was not only already, it was happening. You know. And all these guys, all these American guys were promiscuous. That was one of the things she didn't like. I mean, compared to me, they were like playboys. I was not that. I just got involved with some girls, but you know, they were really compulsive about it. It was a game that they were all in. And this guy who ran the business too was notorious for being a playboy, and he even got written up in American newspapers for his playboy antics in Europe. But he was very effective with girls, you know. I mean, he was an effective person with other people. So he was a charmer with, you know, and also he had a tremendous amount of money. So he had affairs with well-known European girls, actresses. I forget who, but you would know who they were if I mentioned them. And he had an affair with some dictator's wife. I forget what her name was. Anyway.
Sounds a bit dangerous.
Pardon?
That sounds a bit dangerous.
Yeah, I'll remember sometimes the names, but I mean, I never met them. But he bought chateaus, and he was famous for his social activities. Meanwhile, when I was in London, London started booming in the 50s also. The spirit of freedom was happening in London at the time. I forget what they called it. They had a name also. You know, but it was also a lot of sexual freedom was going on in England at the time. There was a name for it, but...
Well, let me just butt in there. I mean, there was the swinging 60s.
Yeah, but this was before, but really? It started, actually the 60s were in America. It started in the 50s in London and Paris. They were extremely free at that time.
Well, what was happening, like, musically, too? Were you going out to see music at that time?
No, I went to an occasional opera, but I went to the opera. I wasn't especially interested in music.
Okay. So you were socializing. Where were you socializing to meet people?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't remember where. I just met them. It was easy to meet people in cafes and
Cafes.
Talking of which, didn't you get to know Sartre?
Yeah, when I was in Paris, I don't know if this was before Virginia left or after, but anyway, it might have been after she left. Anyway, there was a cafe around the corner from the hotel called, I forget the name, it'll come to me.
Les Deux Magots?
No, not the Deux Magots, that was on the other side of town. Cafe Flore.
That's famous.
Flore.
Mm-hmm.
And Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir used to go there. It was kind of they had a big restaurant in the back, and I used to go there to eat. I don't know how I met them. Oh, I think I just went over and introduced myself. I just went over and sat down and introduced myself. I went over and introduced myself, and they invited me to sit down. Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre were sitting eating. And at that time, this was 1953, January, I think. Beckett had written Waiting for Godot. And of course, he was influenced by the whole development of existentialism. And what was bigger than existentialism at the time was the théâtre the absurd, UNESCO. And Beckett was influenced by that as well as existentialism. And he wrote Waiting for Godot, En attendant Godot. And it played at a theater not far from my apartment. It was like off-Broadway, you know, off-Broadway. It was not in the theater section. It was just a little alternative theater. I forget the name, but that'll come back to me also. And so I went to the opening production of En attendant Godot, and there were only about 10 people there. The place was empty. And it got very bad reviews in the French press. But I could see that it was really very, very good. It was, I mean, I responded to it and I took it seriously.
Right.
So
Quick pause, sir. Okay.
So that's how I introduced myself to Sartre and de Beauvoir. I told them that I had seen this play by Beckett, and that I thought it was in the spirit of his point of view and his working. And he said, yes, but, and he had his criticisms. And then he started talking. And he didn't stop. He was a compulsive talker. So he just talked and talked and talked. And she tried to get a word in edgewise, but no, there was no way that she could get a word in edgewise. He just went on and on and on. And I didn't get a word in edgewise either. He just ranted and ranted. So, I just sat and listened, and I didn't understand everything he was saying, but I did understand most of it. And then after about an hour, I left. So I didn't even think anything of it. He wasn't so famous at the time, It was 1953. But he responded to me because I mentioned Beckett and Giacometti. I mentioned that I was an admirer of Giacometti. So.
It sounded like he was friendly.
Pardon?
Sound like he was friendly.
He was very full. He was a very gregarious man, of course. Yeah, I mean, everybody was gregarious in that time. The social life in Europe was extremely gregarious, especially for Americans. I mean, come over. So that, but I lived around the corner from that cafe, so I just went over there, and I didn't used to patronize it very much. There was one across the street on the other side that I used to patronize. I forget the name, but it come back to me. So anyway, the point is that Virginia came back to the States for her father's death and funeral, and she didn't want to return. So I got very upset. Very upset. I mean, and then one of my college roommates came over with his wife to visit, and they visited me. And I just remember that they were upset how upset I was.
You didn't want to go back to the States?
No, because I was in the middle of working for this guy. And, I had this apartment in Frankfurt. And I had been acquiring things. I had books, and I had set up myself kind of a life in Frankfurt. And I had friends.
So you felt completely comfortable in the German culture, it sounds
Yeah.
like, with the language and the people. And
I
the
felt
place
completely
and the food
cultured.
and-
Well, I mean, I was into French-German culture. I mean, I had studied German in high school, and I had heard Heidegger's lectures, and I was into that. I had been reading that stuff. And also, anyway.
I'm just interested. Can you say a little more about what was it about German culture and thought, or that appealed to you? What things? Can you be more specific?
Well, when I was at Columbia, I was interested in the origins of existentialism, of Heidegger. And it went back to a philosopher by the name of Husserl, who was like a neo-Kantian. And I had studied Kant. I was interested in the development of German thought, German philosophy. Goethe, Schiller, Kant. Novalis was an interesting writer. Rilke. It was all extremely, it was depth-oriented philosophy and literature. And hardly anything was known about it in the United States. So I pursued it. And and Heidegger was extremely interesting. Still is. There's people are still investigating the origins of Heidegger's ideas. But they came out of the German tradition. There was a bunch of people, German philosophers called neo-Kantians, people who were trying to revive Kant's ideas, as contrasted to British ideas. And it's still happening, actually. People don't realize. Like, a lot of the economic philosophy of the Republicans can be traced back to a school of economics called the Austrian economists, who wrote in German and were influenced by this kind of philosophical thinking, actually. So, I mean, to go into details would be sort of cumbersome, but...
Well, we're going to do a whole session on philosophy, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, well, anyway, Friedrich Hayek, who wrote The Road to Serfdom, which is like the Bible of neoconservatism here, was an Austrian economist. You know, and he wrote some very interesting stuff. You can still read Road to Serfdom. But it came out of the Kant's influence on the development of economics and politics in Germany and Austria too. So you know, Kant was before Hegel, although Hegel was very influential also. It was called idealism, you know, but they didn't mean what we mean by idealism. They meant the formation of ideas as being the source of social and civil discourse. So
I think I've got to change the card anyway, so let's just take a pause. I've got to stop.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, we're going. Yep.
So we're picking up now. Virginia didn't want to come back.
no, Virginia didn't want to come back, and I was stuck in this doctor's apartment in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm not stuck, but I was sort of committed to it. I was having a good time there, but I was upset that she didn't want to come back. So I stayed and I was working. And the more that she stayed away, the more I got involved with other people there. And I was developing a kind of a life in Germany. But I was not happy either with this business, because this theme of running through my life of opposition to crass materialism is a very important theme. I mean, it was not my thing, although I tried to learn how to do it. I was not nearly as successful as some of the other guys who went gung-ho for money, you know, and it was all I was ever interested in. I was still interested in the people there. So, and the culture. So, you know, I was reading books, and I had a lot of books, and this nice apartment, and some interesting girls from East Germany, Czechoslovakia. I mean, interesting is the wrong word. Attractive, let's say. None of them were really, you know, the caliber of Virginia. None of them were really well educated. But they did have this, you know, different culture. They were coming from a different culture. So they were interesting.
Now, Virginia did graduate work at Columbia?
Could I ask you just
Oh.
one? Could you just turn, Sheldon, yeah, turn a little bit like that. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry,
Virginia went back and resumed some connection to Columbia, yes. But then, 1961, I got a telegram from the office that my mother had contacted the office and my father was very ill. So, I mean, I knew what that meant. You know, it meant they were very ill. It meant he was going. So Virginia was still here, and I still had all my apartment there, and all my books, and my car, and my girlfriends. So, I mean, say girlfriends is too strong a word. My friends. And then, so I got upset. And I made arrangements for one guy who I'd been training to drive me to the airport. He came. I was in the hospital. I had hurt my back when I began sending books back to the States. I began loading them up, and I hurt my back bad, so I could hardly move. So I had to go to the hospital. And the German hospitals, again, it was free, and they were remarkably good. Not only that, but not only were they technologically good, but they were also holistically oriented, naturalistically oriented. So I had kidney stones, and I went to a German hospital for the pain and the kidney stones. And the doctor said, go up to the roof and jump down the stairs all the way to the bottom floor. I said, really? He said, yeah, you'll shake them loose. And it worked.
It worked?
It worked. I went up to the roof and started hopping down the stairs, and I passed the stones.
Amazing.
So he said, that's naturalistic medicine, tradition. You know, and I had other experiences like that too. Anyway, so I was now in the German hospital with my back problem, and they had me sleeping on the floor. And it was getting better, sleeping on the floor. But this guy came to take me to the airport. And my girlfriend at the time, Uda Yashki, was the daughter of the chief surgeon of Prague. She had come over because there was the East European uprisings against the Soviet Union. And she was one of the refugees from that retreat from East Germany. I knew quite a few of them, mostly girls who left. You know, they were opposed to the tyranny of Stalinism. But their parents remained. Her father remained there. But she was in Frankfurt, and I met her. And she was intelligent, interesting woman, girl. But I had only just recently met her, so it hadn't gone very far. But anyway, she came to the hospital, and she helped get me together. And I got myself together, and I checked out of the hospital. And I told her to go to the office in Switzerland, and they'd take care of her, which she subsequently did. And the guy drove me to the airport, and I got on a plane. I don't know how I got it. I guess I called the office, and they got me a ticket. I got on the plane and I stood all the way from Frankfurt to New York on the plane because I couldn't sit down. And Virginia met me at the airport, and she drove me right over to, I don't know where she got the car. Anyway, she got a car. She drove me right over to the airport, to my mother's apartment, I guess. And I dropped my stuff, and then I went right to the hospital. And when I got to the hospital, my father was in a tent, an oxygen tent, and he was breathing heavy, and he recognized me, and he was glad to see me, and he said, "I never been so sick." Which, he had never been so sick. So, I mean, apparently he had fallen out of the bed, and they took him to the hospital. But he had bronchitis his whole life. So now he had emphysema. And I asked, and of course I was pretty exhausted, so I asked the doctor that was he going to last the night. He said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It'll last the night. Go home and come back tomorrow." So I went back to my mother's apartment, and I sent my brother over there. My brother was staying with my mother. And I went to sleep, and he went over to the hospital. And next thing I knew, he came back and woke me up. And he said by the time he got there, they were wheeling him out. So I got, naturally I was upset. I said, "Well, the guy told me he was going to last the night." He said, "Well, he didn't last very long." But anyway, he saw me and he said, "I never been so sick." At that time, Kennedy was president, I think. Yeah, Kennedy was president. And his father was ill. And he got a tremendous amount of medical attention. So his father survived. But he was very ill for the rest 8 years or so, and in a wheelchair. And then he died. But anyway, so Virginia came, and I don't know how we reconciled, but somehow we reconciled. I guess she stayed with me in my mother's apartment for a while. Yeah, that's what happened. And then...
and this was in the Bronx, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, to make it a little brief, Virginia and I reconciled. She went and stayed with her parents in Flushing, Queens. And I looked for a place to live. I had left everything in Frankfurt, but so they was there. I had put all my stuff in a basement of a bar where I knew the people. And then I rented a room on West End Avenue in 74th Street, I think, in some kind of a rooming house. And I stayed there for a while and tried to reorganize myself. I maintained contact with the company because they had been trying to set up a new office on 57th Street here in New York. So I was supposed to stay and help them. Meanwhile, they owed me money. And I tried that, but I could see it was not going to work, and I was interested in severing my ties from them anyway. So I did that for a while, and then I met some interesting fellow who had a girlfriend who had an apartment, and they were getting married. And they had a very nice apartment on 71st Street between West End and Riverside. Very nice little apartment on the ground floor. So she left there and went off to live with him, and she gave me the apartment. So I moved into that apartment, and then I brought Virginia in, and she came there and stayed with me. And we were reconciled, and we got together, and then seemed like very good, so we had Ariel. 1963. And that was pretty amazing, you know, because we had been married already almost 15 years. You know, but I mean, I was still into her. She was still into me. I mean, I had more in common with her than anybody else. And she resumed her connection to Columbia Graduate School. And then I went, and I told you before, that was the time I went and made this connection with the people I knew at the new school. And I started teaching at the new school. So I severed my connection with the company and resumed my academic career, I thought.
Well, tell us a bit about the birth of Ariel and how that was and all that.
Yeah, well, it was Christmas time that Virginia and I had a very loving session. Then Ariel was conceived Christmas time, and she was born October 5th, 9 months later, 1963. And I went to be assistant, and it was a very difficult birth. It was a breech. And I wanted to be an assistant, you know, but they drove me out of the delivery room. And I don't know what they did to Virginia. I don't know if they gave her a transfusion or not. But we both got hepatitis C, which is possible that was from that. But anyway, Ariel was born. It was a very long delivery, overnight. I stayed in the hallway.
What hospital was she born?
Columbia Presbyterian.
Okay.
Good hospital. And she had a big mole in her head, which we were worried about, but that disappeared. Mm-hmm. But as I say, it was a difficult delivery for Virginia. And but that was it. There was that baby. And she was a beautiful baby. And we were both thrilled to have her. And also, as she developed, you know, turned out to be a very beautiful child. And we were both... Oh, and her mother came to help. So her mother came and stayed in this apartment with us and helped Virginia with the baby. I was now teaching. And it seemed like a nice situation. I was teaching at the new school, and I became very popular there because I was teaching this stuff that had been now coming over to the States, and people were interested in it.
What were you teaching?
Existentialism, Sartre, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and also, I started a human relations workshop because businesses were getting psychologically oriented at the time, and they were starting these human relations programs. So I had this European experience with this company. So I knew a lot about it. So I started a human relations workshop. And I used to get people come to that workshop to learn about human relations. You know. And then there was another teacher there, a woman who had been in therapy with Wilhelm Reich, orgone therapy, and she was very interested, and you know, I got friendly with her. I mean, just academically, and she knew Abraham Maslow. So she invited Abraham Maslow to come, and he talked to a joint meeting of our classes. So, and of course, I met him, and that was my introduction to humanistic psychology, and I got interested. Oh, and Virginia had insisted that I was a problem case, and that I needed to go to psychotherapy. And in those days, it was all the rage here, psychoanalysis. So I agreed to go. They didn't have any couples therapy, and there was nothing wrong with her. It was me, according to her. See, all the problems we had were my fault. So I went, and of course I didn't like it, and I didn't like the guy. Lou Ormont, he was a famous New York City psychoanalyst on the Upper West Side. And he said some pretty stupid things to me. Very stupid they were. I mean,
was he oriented in only one modality?
Pardon me?
Was he oriented in only one modality?
Yeah, he was pretty strict psychoanalytic, Freudian.
Okay.
Yeah, he was. My brother, by that time, my brother was in graduate school, psychology, getting his PhD in psychology at Penn State. So he knew this guy and he recommended him. But anyway, I went for a while and I didn't like him. And so I told him I wanted to go somewhere else. So, and of course the main problem was with Virginia. That was what I wanted to work out. So he agreed to send me to a woman who was a specialist in family therapy, Laura Singer. She was actually the president of the American Family Association or something. At that time, it was just beginning. And she was a very nice, attractive person. And she was more eclectic. She was connected to, she also was very politically liberal. She was connected to her husband. Her husband was a well-known left-wing intellectual. I forget his name. And she was connected to the Community Service Society, which is a very liberal organization. Anyway, point is, she had politically liberal ideas, which I had always had anyway. And so I got along nicely with her, and she liked me, I liked her. So I worked with her for a while, and then she decided that her approach was not profound enough for me. So she referred me to a woman from Sweden. Also, I had all this European background. So she referred me to Renee Nell, who was a famous Jungian psychotherapist in the city. Also, by that time,
Sorry, pause, sorry. Okay.
by that time, I had become interested in the intellectual background of psychology. I had originally taken a psych course at the University of Wisconsin, so I knew a lot of elementary psychology. But I didn't know too much about the recent developments of Freud and Jung and Adler. But I informed myself. I investigated it and went into it, and by that time I really knew a lot. So she referred me to Renee Nell, and I got along well with Renee Nell, who was a Jungian, and the Jungians were into, as you know, religion, and of course I knew a lot about religion, and so I took to it, and I became expert in the theory. So meanwhile, I was teaching philosophy at the New School, and a guy I knew, I don't know who he was, I forget who he was. Anyway, there was an opening to teach psychology at Westchester Community College. So a guy I knew the people there, and he said he was going to recommend me. I said, but that's not my field. My field is philosophy. He said, yeah, but you know more than psychology than anybody that they're going to get. So go up there, talk to them. So I went up and talked to them, and they gave me a job, assistant professor of psychology. So I was teaching psychology at Westchester Community College, and I was teaching philosophy at the New School. And then NYU asked me to teach a course, so I was teaching a course at NYU on on British philosophy. Gotch.
A little bit. No, I kind of avoided it.
They made a big fuss over it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not interested. It's just too much, you know. Anyway, let's keep going because we've only got about 15 minutes. Let's do the last
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I'm just curious at this point, how old is Ariel, and did she go to kindergarten at the Upper West Side or grade school of any kind?
No. I tell you, we were living on this apartment on 71st Street between West End and Riverside. It was a small apartment, but it was nice. And her mother was coming and helping us. So Ariel was growing up, and it turned out she was a beautiful baby. And, we were thrilled with her. And she was all right there, but it was in the middle of Manhattan. And I had these experiences with the German doctors. So I was still having trouble with my back and I got pain in my shoulder. So I went to a German doctor around the corner on 72nd Street between West End and Riverside. There was a German doctor who had opened an office on the ground floor there. So I just walked in. And I told him I was having trouble with my shoulder, which I was, pain. And I told him my history and so on. And he was pleased, what I told him about the German hospital. And the kidney stones that I jumped down the stairs with, and that I had been on the floor, lying on the floor with my back. He said, I'm going to take care of you naturalistic way, homeostatic. So he put a syringe in my arm, and he drew blood. He drew blood out of it, and then he put it back in. I said, no medicine or anything. No. He says, there's a naturalistic method to treat your arm, homeostatically. So I said, okay. They said, don't worry, it's going to get better. And sure enough, it got better. And I've told American doctors about it, and they just can't believe it. But anyway, he was German, and we talked some about Germany and everything. He was a German Jew, of course, you know. And he had a little mansion on Spuyten Duyvil, which is the northernmost tip of the Bronx, near Manhattan, where Manhattan and the Bronx join up in the 200s, around 220th Street. And he had this old Spanish mansion that was there on the cliff overlooking the Hudson. It was old, and but it was very beautiful, very natural place. So he said, and I told him about my story, and I was getting crowded in the apartment with Virginia and her mother and the baby and me. So he said I should come up, and he's going to give me the whole first floor of the mansion. Well, give it to me, but rent it to me. And I should come up there with the baby. We should come up and rent it. So we did. And it was a very beautiful place. It overlooked the Hudson. There was a big porch outside where we could put Ariel. And there was plenty of room for Ariel. And there was plenty of room for the books and everything. So I came and I put all the books in there. And moved there with Virginia. Well, meanwhile, Virginia had gone back to Columbia, and she was in the Graduate School of Education. I don't know whether she had finished or not. Maybe she had finished already, I don't know. But anyway, the baby was growing up. And that's what happened. The baby grew up there, and I taught at Westchester Community College and drove up there and back to the city to teach at NYU and teaching at a new school. So I was extremely busy again. It was the same story. I hardly ever saw Virginia. She was with her mother and the baby in this place, sort of cut off from everything.
I remember I like the story you told about Ariel and the books and the shelves.
Yeah. So anyway, we're up here, and I'm coming back and forth, and every time I come back, Ariel had pulled all the books off the shelves, and they were all lying all over the floor. And, and that distressed me. I mean, I didn't get angry at Ariel. She was a baby. But I got angry at Virginia because she let her do it. But, she was permissive with her and, whatever. I mean, but it distressed me a lot. I mean, because books have been a very big part of my life. I didn't like them all lying all over the floor. But it was hard to move around. Anyway, Virginia was not into homemaking or housekeeping, And then her mother moved out, so her mother went back to Flushing, and she was there alone with the baby, and I was away all the time. So things got bad between us again. And she wanted to pursue her own career. So I don't remember if she decided to move out or first got a job, but eventually she decided to move out. And I had to give up the place. And I don't know where I went from there. Oh, and I rented a place. I rented in a very small room opposite the New School for Social Research, back into a little small room. Oh, and then I helped Virginia get an apartment in Staten Island in a project that they were building over there. I guess middle income housing or something. A nice new place, nice apartment. So I went and got that. And I think mother went and stayed with her some more and took care of Ariel. And I was visiting. And then she finished, she got a job at Ulster Community College, which is in Kingston, near Woodstock. And she decided to move up there.
What year would you say this is?
This was 1966.
Okay.
Ariel was 3 years old. 67. Oh, Ariel was going to, Virginia was in Teachers College. And first she rented a place, a student place right across from Teachers College on 120th Street. And Ariel was there with her and her mother. And Ariel went to kindergarten at Riverside Church, at a kindergarten. Yeah, Riverside Church. Good kindergarten. So Ariel was in kindergarten, and she was living there with her mother and taking courses. And then she got a job at Ulster County Community College. No, someplace or other, she moved to Staten Island. I don't remember which preceded which. And she went and took that job, and I was a little bit appalled because it meant I was not going to be able to see Ariel, which was extremely important to me. I used to go every weekend to Staten Island. So she got this place up there, and then things got to be very difficult. And then she got a lawyer, and I had to get a lawyer. And the lawyers made things worse, a lot worse. And it got to be like warfare, you know. So things were unpleasant. And there were a few very unpleasant incidents. And Ariel was around and saw them.
Just 1 second, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, so it was very difficult for Ariel. But I thought she was doing okay. But now it turns out that there were things about it that upset her a lot. I didn't even know about. I mean, Virginia is a very strong-willed person, and a lot of her own ideas about how things should be with Ariel. And I didn't have that much input. But Ariel thinks I was more responsible than I really was. So Ariel has a lot of complaints about what went down around that time in her childhood, which is understandable. I mean, it was very difficult. But she did well. I mean, she was a very gifted child, and she was very smart, and turned out to be a very unusually superb person, but I think she's disturbed by some of the stuff that happened. But, so I used to go visiting up in Woodstock, but Virginia made it very difficult. So first I rented a place up near there, near her house, But Ariel used to complain about it, and she would call her mother, or her mother would call, and then she would come and take the child away from the visit. So I talked to my lawyer, and he said, get a place further away. So I had a girlfriend at the time who I was pretty involved with. Where did I live then? Oh, I rented my apartment, the one that I have now.
In the city, you mean?
Yeah. And then I had been staying in a little room opposite the new school. But then a fellow I knew came and told me he knew about an apartment, and I gave this apartment on 18th Street. Anyway, I got this apartment, and I had a friend, a girlfriend. And we went to, there was a psychology convention at Lake Minnewaska, which is a very famous lake up near Woodstock. So I went with her to this convention at this lake. And it was very beautiful place. So I said, well, then let's try and find a place near here. So we did. We went, found a real estate agent. Real estate agent let us this house that I bought. It was a very beautiful place. But I've had some problems maintaining it, and got hit very hard by Hurricane Irene, which we went through terrible stress with recuperating this past year. Very terrible stress. Then I came back here and got hit by Hurricane Sandy in my apartment here. And I'm not recovered from that yet. Social worker from Hudson Guild is coming tomorrow to see what condition it's in and whether she can get me some help.
Very good.
It's in bad condition. I've had a lot of problems with it. I had problems with the landlord. So, anyway, this thread runs through my life. And it's still happening that I have this alienation from the American style of life. I never was into it, and I'm not into it now. And I can't keep up with it because, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a millionaire.
So it's that feeling that America is very materialistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is just too material. It's all too much crass materialism everywhere. Everywhere is crass materialism, even at the senior center. I mean, I can't tolerate the people at the senior center. I mean, they're just all into greed and self-seeking and gluttony. I mean, all they're interested in is food and shoving the food down in their bellies. Even the ones who come from Latin America, although they have a little bit of Spanish culture in them, but not much. So I mean, they've got this crass materialism also.
And you didn't experience that in Europe.
No, although everybody who goes to Europe now tells me that they've caught up with America.
Okay.
That there's crass materialism everywhere now, there too. But when we were there, it was classical culture, and that's what this professor who just died at 104, 105 years old. That was his whole thing. They brought him. He came over here. His father was a diplomat and brought him over here when he was 12 years old. But he already had been exposed to French culture. And then he went to Cambridge, became professor. And he wrote quite a few books. And his whole career was a lament about the decline of high civilization. And he was writing about it even before he died at age 104 and a half. And he made a career out of it, lamenting that classical civilization was deteriorated or overcome by American spirit of frontier spirit, cowboy culture. Yeah, he became famous for that.
I'll have to read up about it. I think we'll call it a day there. Okay.